This situation was more difficult, though. Mountains everywhere. Someone way above Doug's pay grade had decided weeks ago to not use the big tankers to drop retardant. Whether to save face or due to sheer stubbornness, there was basically zero air support. Some garbage about how the mountains, blah, 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 blah. It didn't matter now. Any good that could have been done has been long since past. It was all damage control now. Law enforcement was working overtime from 3 counties in every direction, trying to notify hundreds of thousands of square miles worth of people that they were under evac orders. And here was Doug, on the road to half a state on fire among several half states on fire. He'd been here once before, years ago. Chapter 3, Doug, Search and Conflict, 1 year prior. Doug had been seeing some old friends. Someone had taken his friend's dog, and nobody'd seen each other in a while, so everyone came to help look for the dog. Dogs are like family to a lot of people. When someone takes your dog and you don't know what happens, it's complete and total torture for years. There'd been a long string of dog thefts in the area over the years, and Doug wanted his friend to know that they had exhausted every resource. The dog was chipped, and they'd already checked every kennel. There was posters up on every street, and all the neighbors were talked to, and there turned out to be more dogs disappearing than just Doug's friend. Doug had got his map out at his friend's house and started pinpointing each of the areas. Doug was expected to know every piece of country extremely well, due to being a volunteer firefighter as well as search and rescue. He looked at the map and where everyone had talked about, and he was able to narrow the search pattern down to a small area. Doug and his friends had talked and asked law enforcement for help, but unfortunately, it wasn't as big of a priority at the moment. The story was that some girls had gone missing as well, which the public was more upset about, so that's where the law enforcement resources had gone. Doug and his friend went to the small town in the forest, which was only really a block of stores and then woods in every direction. They weren't looking for trouble, but wanted to know if they'd found the right place. Over dinner, at the only diner in town, a group of ornery guys came in and killed the mood. Doug and his friends sat quietly and tried to enjoy their food. Maybe these guys were a false flag, who knew? It was better to not jump to conclusions. Doug and his friend ate peacefully and quietly and listened to this new boisterous group. It was almost time for them to be getting back to their own town, and it was the end of the weekend. This meant that everyone was going to stop the search and head back to their own places, except for Doug, who could stay a few more days until his vacation was up. One of Doug's friends had an idea to go out and get the guy's license plates just in case. It wasn't too hard to find them. There was a truck outside with some dog kennels on the back. He tried discreetly to go get the plate number, but a second truck pulled up with a second group of guys. Doug threw some money at the waitress and barely got to his friend in time before the 4 guys could demolish him. Doug's 2 other friends got there in time to equal the odds, but moments later the second group came out as well. They all seemed to be friends or relatives or something. Doug's friend was doing his best stupid impression of asking if the truck was for sale, and the strategy wasn't working. There was about to be a horrible 8 versus 4 brutal fight until the bad guys noticed that Doug's shirt wasn't quite concealing his outside waistband holder with a double-stacked 9mm in it. Doug's friend noticed the recognition on their faces and looked down and pulled his shirt up over his piece also. It was a beast of a 1911 chambered in .45 ACP. Neither reached for their guns, but they were there regardless, a warning, more of a threat. One of the head crazies cleared his throat and said authoritatively, "What y'all doing out here?" Doug replied, "We're leaving." Another of the bad group responded, "Yes, you are, and don't come back now, you hear?" A few of them chuckled, eyeballing the group like meat, and then they all walked back inside. Doug and his 3 friends got back in their truck and left. The drive home was mostly quiet, with the adrenaline wearing off and everyone realizing how close they'd come to something horrible. Finally, Doug's friend who'd lost his dog spoke. "What are the odds those are the guys?" Nobody knew the answer. Finally, Doug spoke after giving everyone else a chance. "Give me the plate number and I'll run it through some software." The rest of the drive was silent, and they got back to Doug's friend's place. His name was Tim. 2 of Doug's friends left to go back to their houses, and Tim went to sleep so he could go work the next day. Doug hoped this new set of details would allow Tim to relax a little bit. Instead, the opposite seemed to happen, and nervous energy kept him up for most of the night. Doug stayed up for a bit in the other room and ran the plate number through some expensive software that he had subscribed to a while ago. It helped him in search and rescue, and this was sort of like another type of search and rescue. After the submission, it would take a while to work, and Doug went to sleep, and the software went out to the internet overnight and chugged away to find the info. In the morning, when Doug got up, he found that Tim was already gone. To Doug's disappointment, his laptop was open to a web page with the address of an identity, some known acquaintances, and some prior convictions. He looked over Tim's computer, and it was chip-checked to the person's house. Doug quickly notified the sheriffs and had them do a health check on the address, hoping it would be in time to save Tim's life. Fast forward, and a bunch of girls' remains were found in sheds under paved porches, and stolen dogs were rescued, rehabilitated, and returned. Tim ended up being okay and reunited with his four-legged friend. The charges on some of the individuals stuck, but they only spent roughly a year in jail apiece. Dog fighting was unfortunately not a crime that stuck for long anymore, despite so many experts showing it was a gateway crime for even more grievous violence. And it turned out that the sons were responsible for the missing girls. They'd got off on light sentences, being under 18 years old, and were out on bond awaiting retrials as adults. Rumor was that more girls had already started going missing, but no dogs, though. Doug and his friends, having their big mission complete, drifted away after that. They always tried to get together at least once a year somewhere between Memorial Day and Labor Day. It helped them blow off steam and make sure they didn't drift apart too much. Chapter 4, Doug to the fire. Dawn, back to day 1. The sun was rising, and Doug realized it was just about time. He should otherwise be connecting up with his friends again. He wished he was here under better circumstances. He'd hoped to get a chance to see his friends. He'd sent them all text messages letting know he was in the area, but when he checked his cell signal, he saw there was no bars. Darn towers must be out, he thought to himself. Thankfully, his phone was plugged into the truck of the firefighters driving to the area, so it was at full battery. At least the message is sent, he thought to himself. Hopefully he'd be seeing his friends. Hopefully this fire thing would be a quickie, but based on the forecast, this was the most unusual fire he had ever seen. Doug was ready, though. He had everything in his pack that he needed. Rounding it all off was a folded FNC carbine model of a rifle. It wasn't very popular in the States, but was chambered in 5.56 and accepted all the common AR mags, which was pretty cool. The last time Doug was up here, it didn't go very well, so he wanted to be prepared. He had a weird feeling he was going to need his rifle, but if everything went fine, at least he'd have something to shoot with his friends. He reminded himself that needing always happened after the fact. He was trained to always be prepared, and that meant for the two-legged and the four-legged varieties. So he had his 3-day bag and a lot of ammo, and he was going to fight this fire. His group finally got to the site, and he dropped his gear off, along with the survival essentials, was his tent, his sleeping pad, and a sleeping bag. It was a micro sleeping bag that fit in a tiny bag. The bag compressed and inflated itself upon being unrolled. The tent was a little one-man pod that was just big enough for him and his pack. The admins would bring the fire gear in a little bit. Food was already on, and he set his gear down where it looked appropriate and went to go get some chow. Other portions of the crew were arriving in the 4s and dropping their gear off as well. There were several other guys that had rifles also. Doug went to go back and get his so he didn't feel out of place. Normally, first responders packing firearms would be frowned upon, but the citizens had been doing more roadblocks lately, as looting had increased, and a firefighter's gear was their life. They had to stay protected. The best way for them to be protected now was for them to protect themselves. That's simply how it was. So they were all sitting down eating breakfast, and Doug didn't know any of these folks, so he decided to sit and eat and listen. They were talking about how the prior crew had got ambushed with significant portions of their gear stolen. Someone had even been shooting at them, but thankfully nobody was hit. Doug subtly looked around the camp as everyone was eating. He noticed a gal with a Galil rifle. He figured it was chambered in 7.62 by 51 based on the larger magazine and full-length barrel. It had a weird wiry barrel shroud he'd never seen before and an aggressive flash hider. She had dark hair, which was tied back tight in a ponytail. He continued to listen to the story and hypothesis and tried not to stare at the rifle. Everyone that didn't have a rifle by now was either getting one or press-checking their pistols to make sure they had a round in the chamber. As the story went, in 2 different other cases, entire vehicles were stolen. This left the fire crew stranded and needed an evac of their own. While unfortunate, it made sense to Doug. When there was no rule of law, the animals come out. It had been getting worse recently, almost like it had been some part of a new system. He'd heard of electrical line workers being attacked due to the perception of electrical being restored to subdivisions in the wrong order, but flat out attacking firefighters?